Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 through 23. Verses 16 and 17. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect of the holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Burkett notes, here we have an inference or conclusion drawn by our apostle from the foregoing argument that seeing the ceremonial law was now abolished, therefore none should take upon them to judge or condemn another for not observing any of the legal ceremonies, either those that related to meats, that is, the difference to be observed in meats, or those relating to the differences to be observed in days. Here note that the days observed among the Jews were of three sorts: anniversary, which returned every year, called here a holy day; lunary, which returned every month, the first day of every new moon; weekly, which returned every week, and on the seventh day of the week, all which are abrogated, even the Jewish seventh-day Sabbath, and the Lord's Day or the Christian first-day Sabbath substituted in its place, 1 Corinthians 16:2. Observe here, 1, that there is both a sinful and a lawful abstinence from meats. That abstinence is sinful when men abstain from some meats upon pretense of holiness or conscience, as if some meats were unclean, or less holy in their own nature than others, 1 Timothy 4:4, or as if simple abstinence at any time were a thing acceptable to God in itself, without respect had to the end for which it is sometimes required. But there's a threefold abstinence from meats which is lawful: political, enjoined by the magistrate for civil ends; medicinal, prescribed by the physician for health preservation; ecclesiastical, when God, by his providence and the voice of his church, calls his people to fasting. Observe, too, the reason alleged by the apostle why Christians should not judge one another with respect to meats and drinks, times and seasons, namely, because those legal ceremonies were but dark shadows of things to come. But the body and substance, represented by those shadows, is Christ come in the flesh, and consequently to observe these ceremonies and regard these shadows under the gospel is in effect to say that Christ, the body, is not yet come. Here note 1, the title given to the ceremonial worship. It's styled a shadow, because it was a dark and imperfect representation of the truth. What is a shadow but the coming of a thick body between us and the sun? The legal ceremonies were interposed between Christ, the true light, and us, and so cast a shadow of him. Note 2, the title given to Christ with respect to the shadows of the ceremonial law. He's the body and the substance of them. Now, as the shadow vanishes when the substance is come, so these ceremonial ordinances were to cease upon the coming of Christ. And to observe them now under the gospel is in effect to say that Christ is not yet come in the flesh. Note 3, that the Jewish Sabbath was a ceremonial ordinance, and part of that handwriting of ordinances which was to be blotted out by Christ. And consequently the Christian is not obliged to observe it. And the distinction of meats and drinks and the observation of the new moons were confessedly ceremonial. So was also the Jewish Sabbath, which, with the rest, was equally cancelled by Christ, as a part of the handwriting of ordinances. So that to observe the Jewish Sabbath, or to condemn the Christian for not observing it, is as much a denial that Christ has come in the flesh as to observe circumcision or any other part of the ceremonial law. Verses 18 and 19. Let no man beguile you of your reward in a voluntary humility and worshipping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshy mind. And not holding the head, from which all the body by joints and bands, having nourishment ministered, and knit together, increaseth with the increase of God. Burkett notes, our apostle, having warned the Colossians against the errors of the Judaizing teachers, comes next to warn them against the practice of the paganizing Christians, who were directed by their guides to worship the angels, covering their error with a plausible show of humility, pretending that it was presumptuous to go to God immediately, without the mediation of those excellent creatures. But this, the apostle tells them, was a bold intruding into things they knew nothing of, God having neither revealed nor taught any such thing, and argued that they were vainly puffed up with the foolish imagination of their own fleshly minds. Next he shows that these angel worshippers do not acknowledge Christ for the head of the church, whilst they apply themselves to angels as mediators, whereas he alone discharges the office of the head, completely giving life and growth to his whole church and to every member thereof, which members, being furnished with spiritual life from him, and knit to him and one another by the joints and bands of charity and other graces, they grow and increase with such an increase of holiness as is from God and tends to his glory. Note here, 1, that the nature of man is prone, extremely prone, to idolatry and false worship. 2, that it is as really idolatry to worship an angel as to worship a worm, for divine worship is only due to a divine person. Note 3, that it's a renouncing of Christ to make use of angels or any other mediator besides Christ unto the Father, not holding the head. It was a notion that early, and indeed universally, possessed the minds of mankind, that God was not to be immediately approached to by sinful men, but that their prayers were to be presented by certain mediators and intercessors who were to procure for them the favor of God and the acceptance of their prayers. Hence they worshipped angels and the souls departed of their heroes, whom they canonized and translated into the number of their inferior gods, by whom they addressed their supplications to their superior gods. With this notion, Almighty God was pleased to comply so far as under the Jewish institution to appoint Moses as a mediator betwixt him and them, and now under the Christian dispensation to appoint Jesus Christ to be the only mediator betwixt God and man. Note 4, that it is usual for idolaters and false worshippers to cover themselves with a more than ordinary show of humility. Let some beguile you in a voluntary humility. True it is that all duties of worship ought to be voluntary as opposed to constrained, but they must not be voluntary as voluntary is opposed to instituted or appointed. God doth no more approve of that worship we give him according to our will than he doth approve of our neglect of that which is according to his own will. But man, vain man, likes any way of worshipping God which is of his own framing, much better than that which is of God's own appointing. Verse 20 through 23. Whereof, if ye be dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why, as though living in the world, are ye subject to ordinances? Touch not, taste not, handle not, which are all to perish with the using, after the commandments and doctrine of men, which things have indeed a show of wisdom in well worship and humility, and neglecting of the body, not in any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. Burkett notes, our apostle, being now in the close of this chapter, returns to expostulate and argues the case with those who are willing to subject themselves to the observation of the old Jewish rites and ceremonies. He argues thus, if, says he, you profess yourself in your baptism to be spiritually dead with Christ and to be freed by his death from the Levitical ordinances, why are you subject to those ordinances? Such are, touch not, taste not, handle not. Touch not any unclean thing, taste not any forbidden meat, handle not any consecrated vessel. All which observances which were to perish necessarily with the very using. And whereas they were set off with a specious show of wisdom, as if they were voluntary services and free will offerings to God, he acknowledges that they had indeed a show of wisdom, a show of humility, a show of mortification and austerity to the body, and not seeming to give any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. But all this had nothing of spiritual devotion and piety in it. Learn hence, 1, that such as do by baptism profess themselves to be dead with Christ to the ceremonial law, may certainly conclude that the Jewish ceremonies have no more any power over them, or that they ought to yield themselves to the observation of them. If you be dead with Christ, why are you subject to ordinances? Learn, too, that though God approveth and accepteth willing worship, yet not will worship, what fair show soever it may seem to have either of wisdom, humility, or mortification, whatever is the product of our fancies is a very fornication in religion, and an abomination in the sight of God, how pleasing soever it may be in the sight of man. And yet men are most forward to that service of God which is of man's finding out and setting up. Man likes it better to worship a god of his own making than to worship the God that made him, and likes any way of worshiping God which is of his own framing more than that which is of God's appointing. Ah, wretched heart of man, which whilst it seems very zealous to worship and honor God, hath not zeal to do it in any other way than that of which reflects the highest dishonor upon him.